A new study has actually revealed an interesting way that some populations in Africa have actually been evolving to better live in the harsh, arid desert environment that they call home. The study was focusing on the genetics of the Turkana people, a population that has lived across northern Kenya. They're nomadic. They live in an area where it routinely gets up over 100 degrees, up to around 122 degrees Fahrenheit, and water is extremely rare. Previous studies had shown that around 90% of the population was actually really dehydrated, but they didn't seem to really experience negative health effects from that. And they also consume a lot of animal products. Around 80% of their food comes in the form of protein, whether it's milk, blood, or red meat. In most populations, their diet would lead to gout, but gout is really rare in this population. So that was kind of one of the indicators that there might be something going on here at a genetic level. They ended up sequencing the genomes of almost 400 people living in this region, some still nomadic, some had actually moved into towns and cities, which allowed them to compare something at the end that I'll get into, the evolutionary mismatch hypothesis. But first, back to that DNA. They analyzed over 8 million genetic variants, and when doing that, they found 8 regions of the DNA that seemed to have strong indicators that natural selection had been occurring there. One of those, STC1, stood out amongst the rest as it had really strong evidence of strong natural selection, and when they looked at the functionality of this, they realized there was an enhancer acting on this in their genome, essentially making this gene, the gene itself was the same, but the enhancer made the gene much more active. And the gene is actually enhancing the kidney. So what they found is that they think this adaptation actually allows the body to hold on to more water when it's filtering the urine, and then the people with this mutation, they just naturally are going to have more highly concentrated urine. So that darker urine we think of when we are dehydrated is the norm for them, which means they likely have some adaptations that help make that safer, as they don't seem to have the same negative impacts we see in other humans that would be having that high levels of urea in their urine, for example. And an interesting thing to note here is that the evidence suggests that this strong natural selection was occurring around 5,000 years ago, which, if you know your history of Africa, that's the end of the humid period where the Sahara Desert was starting to expand south, and these regions, which would have been more vegetation, more lush, more water, they were becoming more like desert. And this seems to be how the populations of humans responded. They evolved and adapted to that more arid environment. So now this all brings me back to the evolutionary mismatch hypothesis. It basically says that as human populations have been evolving for tens of thousands of years and moving around to their different environments, they have been picking up adaptations that help them survive where they have been evolving. And now we live in a time where people can up and move to all different parts of the world, and in some cases, these adaptations that help them in one area may lead to more chronic issues in other areas that aren't necessarily the same type of environment they evolved for. And I think learning more about this is going to be really important moving into the future, like with the medical field.